Welcome to episode 17 of my guide to video game history. And what a bumper episode this is going to be as we cover the arcades of the 90s up until the present day, when the beat-em-up was king. Also in this episode I wanted to tell a little brief history of some of these arcade developers that has made arcade gaming what it is today. Our story begins by going back to the arcades of the late 1980s. At this time, arcade games were beginning to lose their popularity, being replaced by closer and closer home arcade conversions that didn't swallow your money as you played. However, in 1991, the arcade would enjoy a renaissance, thanks mainly to one game being released. It was a sequel to a relatively obscure beat-em-up that came out in 1987, and that game was called Street Fighter by Capcom. But before we discuss this classic game and its sequels, let's first give a real quick history of Capcom themselves. Set up in 1979 and originally called the Japanese Capsule Computer Company, and only becoming Capcom later on. It was set up initially to try and ride on the wave of Space Invader mania of the time, but they wouldn't really start to make waves themselves in the arcades until 1984, when Capcom stole the cream talent of Konami. The first person they took was Yoshiki Okamoto, who did two classic shooters for Konami, being the brilliant Time Pilot game and the Tempest-like blaster called Gyros. Incidentally, he left Konami when they fired him for asking a bigger raise from them, and then threatening to quit if they didn't. Anyway, when he went on to Capcom, he would release for them the revolutionary shooter 1942. Suddenly, Capcom were big news, and with Yoshiki on hand creating such further classics, such as 1943, Gunsmoke, Final Fight, who can disagree? Then, in 1985, Capcom stole another gaming developer legend from Konami. His name was Takeru Fujiwara, and he would go on to create such gems for Capcom, such as Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, Bionic Commando, and of course the Mega Man games for Capcom. But enough of this history lesson, let's go back to our story and the game Street Fighter. Created by Takashi Nishiyama, who had previously created such arcade classics as Section Z and Legendary Wings for Capcom, and it had the artist Hiroshi Matsumoto doing the graphics for the game. The original game had many innovative touches, as you had 12 combatant warriors that must fight it out to become the winner. You also had in the game an energy bar with special moves that could be performed by your characters. All of this now becoming the standard blueprint for all beat-em-ups that have followed ever since. But despite all its innovations, the game didn't at this time set the world alight, mainly perhaps because the game's balance wasn't quite right yet. No, it would instead be in 1991 when Capcom's wonder developer Yoshiki Okamoto took up the Street Fighter reins. Originally he wanted to do a sequel to his Final Fight games, but instead Yoshiki was told by Capcom sales that he would instead pick up the Street Fighter game name and create a new versus beat-em-up game. He took all the groundbreaking innovations of the first game, but then tweaked the gameplay and character design to absolute perfection, spending 10 months and several artists to get everything right. Released in 1991 and called Street Fighter II World Warriors, he'd taken only two of the game characters from the first game, and that was Ryu, a Japanese martial arts expert, and his former training partner Ken from the US. But the new playable characters he added were equally good, each having their own balanced fighting style and unique look. There were the heavy style fighters such as sumo wrestler E. Honda, Beastman Blanca, or Russian wrestler Zangief, to the fast fighters such as Chinese girl Chun-Li and the US Special Forces soldier Guile. Then you had the limb-stretching yoga master Bao Sin. Then if you got through that lot, you had the computer-controlled bosses to defeat. There was Balrog, originally actually called M. Bison in Japan, There was Vega, who was a cross between a Spanish matador and Freddy Krueger. Then there was Sagat, the one-eyed bald dude who was the final boss of the first game. And finally you had the new big boss man, M. Bison, as it was known in the US. And he was the main boss man in charge of the criminal organisation, Shadaloo. There was a character for everyone, and with perfectly balanced gameplay it quickly started an arcade fever that would take the world by storm. A fever not seen since the days of Pac-Man in the early 80s in the arcades. Arcade gaming was back. Needless to say that a game so phenomenally successful as Street Fighter 2 is going to generate a lot of sequels, although the sheer number that Capcom produced is simply mind-boggling, with so many being nothing more than just gameplay tweaks, or adding a new game character, or better graphics to the game. So I'm not going to go through every iteration here, but one thing I will mention, in 1995, the Street Fighter the movie was released, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Kylie Minogue and Raul Julia. The film got slated at the time, although in my opinion it does have its charms. It's also apparently where Kylie Minogue learned the exercise regimes that turned her into the toned beauty she is today, so it's worth it for that alone. A terrible tie-in game would also come out by Capcom using the digitised graphics of these stars. Much better for the Street Fighter games was in 1996, where they began the Alpha series, or Zero as it's known in Japan and Asia. This basically took all the lovely goodness of Street Fighter 2 but replaced the graphics with gorgeous anime drawing. Also in 1996 was Street Fighter's first foray into 3D with the game Street Fighter EX or Extreme. This series lost a lot of what made the 2D games great. It isn't terrible as people make out, and was popular enough to warrant 2 sequels, with EX2 being released in 1998 and a PS2 only game released in 2000s. No, but it wouldn't be until 1997 when Street Fighter would get its first true sequel with, of course, Street Fighter 3. This was more of the same in some ways, taking the graphics of the Alpha series, but adding the important parrying and block moves, making the game much more a technical fighter, and by many considered the best of the series. Finally, in 2008, Street Fighter would go 3D in the arcades, with Street Fighter 4 being a worthy continuation of the Street Fighter legacy. In addition to the Street Fighter games, Capcom also did some spin-off beat-em-ups, taking all that was great about Street Fighter, but using licensed fighters to fight with. The first game they came out with was in 1994, which was X-Men Children of the Atom. This allowed you to fight between the X-Men characters, finally allowing you to play Wolverine and kick Cyclops' butt. Then in 1995, after such huge success with doing a game as the X-Men, they extended it to the rest of the Marvel characters with the brilliant Marvel superheroes, finally allowing you to play such comic stars as Spider-Man, Captain America and the Incredible Hulk to see who would win out in a fight. Knowing they were on to a good thing here, in 1996 Capcom started to do their Versus series, releasing first X-Men vs Street Fighter, where you could play your favourite Street Fighter character and see if they really could take on the might of the X-Men. Then they extended it to Marvel vs Street Fighter in 1997, and finally Marvel vs Capcom in 1998, extending the player roster each time. Then in 2000 there was the ultimate beat-em-up gamer's wet dream with the release of Capcom vs SNK, where you finally got to see who was the best brawler out there in the game fighting universe. But of course Capcom and the arcades wouldn't just release fighting games after 1991, although at times it does feel like it. One of the best of the other games that they released at this time was in 1993 when they released Dungeons & Dragons Tower Over Doom, which took Sega's Golden Axe in effect but mixed it in the D&D universe, adding light RPG elements to drive the story. They would continue the series in 1996 with the sequel called Dungeons & Dragons Shadow over Mysteria. This upped the ante even more, taking all that was great about that original and running with it, and subsequently this is one of my favourite games of all time, and if you've not played it I really suggest that you track this game down. Capcom would also release some great shooters at this time. They continued the 1942 series of games with 19XX, which was a great update of the series. Then they extended it with 1944, released in 2000, which upped the graphics even more. Finally, a quick mention should go to their other shooter called Gigawing, released in 1999. This medallion-heavy blaster is really good fun to play and well worth tracking down if you've not played it and love this sort of game. Capcom may have kick-started the modern versus beat-em-up genre with Street Fighter, but there would be many contenders out there who would try and steal its crown. And of all of them, it was perhaps SNK that was the most famous, with a great rivalry between the companies, and got closest to stealing that crown. That's the end of Part A, please go on to Part B.